Thank you for joining me today, everyone. My name is Greg Carlson. I am with Bottom Line, a marketing agency based here in Calgary. We help small business, big business, medium business of all kinds, and we chart roadmaps to growth. Joining me today is my friend and colleague, Trevor Beckman from Story Communications. Trevor is a longtime communications professional, has worked with all sorts of brands and companies throughout Western Canada, and is basically what you would call a solopreneur right now with a communications agency. How you doing today, Trevor?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
So today we are talking in our Evolutionary Leaders story about your business, Story Communications, and we're going to touch on a lot of things for business owners who might be feeling unsure about these current times of COVID-19, about how to communicate both internally, externally. Let's start things off though with how did you get involved in communications, why you started Story Communications?
Well, thank you. Story Communications has been around since 2009. Prior to that, I was still an entrepreneur I had my own business starting in 2004. We sold that to a larger agency, but I still liked having a smaller business. So I left that and started Story, and I really enjoy being an entrepreneur, that's for sure. And I love communications. My Story Communications focuses in on communication strategy, public and media relations. That's sort of what we've been up to for the last 10 plus years.
So what is it about the communications business and your line of work that you love?
I really just love working with clients and sort of finding a communication solution to perhaps a business problem. And I enjoy, sort of solving that puzzle with clients. That's one of my favorite aspects of what I do.
All right. So needless to say right now, everywhere around the world, we're all in uncharted territory for business leaders, for companies, for employees. For the average business, whether you're B2B, B2C, where do you even start when it comes to communications in this time? I mean, I think that might be a big thing for a lot of people right now, which is just like, where do I even begin? What do I say?
Well, I think at times of crisis, or truthfully any time, it starts and ends with open, honest, transparent communications. This is the time to be as direct and forthright as you possibly can be. It'll really help to diffuse any concern or anxiety, whether it's with your customers or your employees, to just be as forthright as you can. And because if you try to sort of couch it, sometimes the rumor mill can ramp up, or Twitter trolls, and suddenly you're dealing with a crisis within a crisis.
So one of the things that can really help get people off to a good point or a good start is a crisis communications plan. And I kind of think of it as like the virtual fire extinguisher that everybody knows they're supposed to know how to have or run inside of their home or their business, but do you ever actually really get around to it? So when it comes to crisis communications plan, like what are the bare bones things that you need to have?
Well, a crisis communication plan is a pretty thorough process. It's a pretty complex and takes a long time to develop. So it includes everything from who's on your communications team, or your crisis communications team, and that can include people other than just straight up communicators, and what are their roles and how do you get in touch with them, and you've already started to develop some key messages. So you've got a starting point based on sort of your thought processes on what could go wrong and how would I handle it. So it's a very robust process. However, I know a lot of small and medium-sized businesses may not have this big, plan they can pull off the shelves and say, okay, now implement. And again, I think it can be very simple and straightforward in that it is open, honest, transparent communication. And that's really where folks need to focus. How is this impacting our employees? How is it impacting our customers? And then determining that impact and then communicating that out as quickly and as openly as you can. So it really just gets down to that. If you're going to put it down to the bare bones, that's what it is.
I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about a communications plan, they're thinking about external. What are we going to tell our customers? What are we going to tell the world? What are we going to tell the people that believe in us? But, correct me if I'm wrong, your internal communications plan to your own team and how you speak to them is equally as important. I was wondering if maybe you could touch on an internal plan, how that differs from your external plan, some of those finer points.
Absolutely, especially with this particular crisis. COVID-19 is having a huge impact on employees. So I think it's vital that they are as important as your external customers. Your This potentially could be impacting people's paychecks, how they work, how they're able to remain productive. And so you need to be really thorough and thoughtful in how you communicate with them. And, sometimes, although maybe face to face isn't the necessarily, because we don't want people in groups, but a phone call, try to be as empathetic as you can as you're helping these people navigate through this time, because it is very stressful when it impacts people's income.
Right. So, and then let's flip the switch when it comes to talking about your external communications plan as well. What are some of those finer points that you want to be sending out to your audience, to your customers, to your clients?
Yeah, I think there's some key things that you can sort of have a checklist in a way in terms of how you're communicating internally or even externally. So obviously you want to say, okay, what is the problem? In this case, it's pretty straightforward. It's COVID-19. What are you doing now? So be really prescriptive in terms of what are we doing now as an organization, and then you have some thought to terms of what are you thinking you're going to do in the future. Whether it's even tomorrow can be the future, because things are changing so rapidly. Um, and if you don't know precisely, it's okay to say, look, we don't know, we're investigating this, but we will be providing you with an update on what's going to happen tomorrow or next week, and then set a timeline for when you're going to communicate that. So people feel like you're actually having a conversation, keeping them up to date. You also want to be very empathetic. This is causing anxiety for people, so you can say, hey, we know this is a tough time for employees and our customers. We're working to help you get through this. So it's important to have that kind of tone to your language. And then if you can, try to be helpful. So whether it's as simple as just a reminder for people to wash their hands, or doing something simple to help your customers get through this crisis. So even the library has said we've extended due dates. That's helpful. One less thing you might have to worry about. And chances are you're going to want to do a lot of reading over the next few weeks.
Right.
um, so, or how people can be helpful to you. A lot of theater and arts organizations, they're always kind of near the edge and then living on the margins. So something like this could really be so detrimental to their ability to continue to do the work that they do in our communities. So if you can request that maybe your customers, instead of asking for a refund for tickets, can donate their tickets. People want to be helpful, and they want us all to get through this as a community. So don't be shy about saying, here's how you can help us too during this crisis. So I think those are sort of the key things you should keep in mind. And again, don't be shy. If you don't know, don't be shy about saying, we don't know yet, but we are working on finding the answers for you, and we'll keep you updated.
Right. And I think, further to what you were talking about, I think now is like an optimal, you know, idea or something to run with on that goodwill tip is like, how can I help my community, and do a little bit of humble bragging about what this is what we're doing to help people out. And this is where, like, start looking for opportunities to help. Cause I always feel that builds a ton of goodwill within your audience and within the community at large.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a huge factor right now. Everybody just sort of wants to be helpful. And one way we can all be helpful is stay at home and wash our hands. But there's also other things we can do once we sort of, the novelty of working from home wears off, is how can I help my community? Those restaurants and bars that now have no customers, and we've got people on hourly wages and living off of tips. Now they don't have that source of income. So how can I help? Can I order takeout? I think people are looking for ways to help, so help them get there. And certainly as part of your brand, highlight how you've been helping your employees or your community at large. I've had some of my clients who are now starting a delivery service so that they can be helpful to their customers, obviously also keep their customers, but change the way they do business a bit to sort of, manage this crisis the best they can.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. I think, when we get into these situations, there's people that worry or leaders that worry about saying too much or saying too little, like you said, not being transparent, or maybe oversharing and sharing so much information that it becomes terrifying to either their people or to their audience. How do you find that sweet spot?
Well, again, I think it's going to sound like a broken record. It's open, honest, transparent communications. Try to be empathetic. You don't need to go, into the details of how many cases you found, but I think you just need to be direct and honest. Look, this is a crisis we're all dealing with. Here's how we're dealing with it. Here's what we're looking at over the coming weeks. And just keep that line of communications open and watch your channels and see what kind of chatter is happening and try to get ahead of it as much as you can. Because not handling a crisis well can really have an impact on your brand beyond this current crisis, and can be detrimental to you for months to come, take you a lot longer to get out of it.
So speaking of which, as we, who has done crisis communications right, and maybe what's an example of a definitely do not do, if you've got one handy.
Yeah, I've kind of got two, and they're both food related. So I think we've all heard of Chipotle.
Hmm.
They had some problems with E. coli within their operations, and I think they didn't do a good job of getting ahead of it. They didn't explain what the problem was, why it was occurring, what they were doing to mitigate it. A lot of the chatter was they were more worried about their stock price than they were about the health and safety of their customers. That's not a good message you want out there if you're in the food industry.
No.
And in fact, they felt it on their bottom line. The sort of fiscal quarter following the incident, they had a 30% reduction in sales. So that can have a long-term impact on how you deal with a crisis today can have impact for months to come. So it's important to be honest and transparent, but also be clear with people how you're mitigating this problem. On the flip side of that, Maple Leaf Foods had a similar type incident. Sadly, they had a salmonella outbreak in their factories. And
Listeria, I think, actually, but yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
Listeria. My apologies. My
Oh, okay.
apologies. Regardless, they handled it so well. They looked very forthright, and they were um, they had the president of the company do a video, explain what happened, explain the mitigation strategies they were doing. He was highly empathetic. And you knew that this guy was on it and Maple Leaf was on it. And as a result, it didn't impact them as much as it could have had they not handled it well. So I think those are two case studies that really show how crisis communications done well can really help to mitigate a crisis when it happens.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, to start wrapping this up, it's from what I gained from you, it's all about being open, honest, and transparent as much as possible, even if you don't have all the answers.
Right. Absolutely. I can't emphasize that enough. And I don't know yet is a fine answer. But I'm working on finding the answer and then actually follow through on that. That will just increase the goodwill for your brand um, exponentially. So I think it's really important that you just take that home. Use reputable sources. If you're going to link to information, make sure it's credible. It's not the time to be quoting, your Aunt Karen's Facebook post. This is the time, you're going to Health Canada, you're going to the Alberta Health website. You need to just ensure that whatever you say out there, you can back up. It's fact, and that you're using reputable sources when you're talking about this crisis.
Awesome. All right. Well, so Trevor, if people are interested in talking to you about their own crisis communications or communications in the coming weeks to months or ever, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, for sure. I'm online, storycommunications.ca. You can certainly get in touch with me via my website, or of course through LinkedIn, Trevor Beckman. You can find me there and send me a message, and I'd be happy to chat through your crisis communications plan during this crisis, because it is going to evolve as well as things change, as government programs come online, as this is a moving target. A week ago was a different situation than it is this week. So it's going to be ever evolving. So people are going to need to refresh their communications or their approach, their strategy, their messaging throughout this crisis until it's done, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I hope so too. All right, Trevor. Well, thank you very much for your time today. And folks, if you need help with your communications, please talk to Trevor. And yeah, that's it for us. Keep your hands clean.